And John Kirby, National Security Council spokesman from the White House. John, thank you for joining us this morning. You just heard Martha's finish right there. Prime Minister Netanyahu saying he's going to do whatever it takes. So is escalation inevitable?
We believe that there are better ways to try to get those Israeli citizens back in their homes up in the north and to keep those that are there safely than a war, than an escalation, than opening up a second front there at that border with Lebanon against Hezbollah. We still believe that there can be time and space for a diplomatic solution here, and that's what we're working on.
Working on that, but how so? Because we just heard Prime Minister Netanyahu right there seems to be disregarding whatever the United States is calling for.
Well, look, the Prime Minister can speak for himself and what policies he's trying to pursue, what operations he's trying to conduct. We're all, of course, recognize that the tensions are much higher now than they were even just a few days ago. We certainly have been monitoring the reports of strikes back and forth across that border. But all that does, George, is underscore for us how important it is to try to find a diplomatic solution. Nobody's Pollyannish about how hard that's going to be, certainly in light of the events over the last week or so. But that doesn't mean we're going to give up on it. We don't believe that a military conflict, and we're saying this directly to our Israeli counterparts, George, we don't believe that escalating this military conflict is in their best interest. It's certainly not going to be in the best interest of all those people that Prime Minister Netanyahu says he wants to be able to send back home.
So what exactly is the United States doing now to advance a diplomatic initiative?
We have been involved in extensive and quite assertive diplomacy. In fact, one of our envoys, Amos Hochstein, who I think you know, was in the region just a few days ago. We will certainly keep up those conversations as best we can, and we're talking to both sides here.
This seems to have been sparked, this latest escalation seems to have been sparked by the pager detonations by Israel earlier this week. I know that you've said the United States did not get a heads up there. Is the United States concerned about what some have said is a relatively indiscriminate indiscriminate effect of these pager detonations?
There's not a lot I can say about those incidents. I'm not going to get into the details of it. As I also made clear, we weren't involved in it. I will just say, though, George, that we are watching all these escalating tensions that have been occurring over the last week or so with great concern. And we want to make sure that we can continue to do everything we can to try to prevent this from becoming an all-out war there with Hezbollah across that Lebanese border. We don't want, in fact, we've been working since the beginning of this conflict, October 8th and on, to try to prevent an escalation, to prevent a broadening of this conflict there in and around Israel, but also in the region.
Let me take a step back on that question. It was a pretty shocking attack coming from Israel. I think they certainly achieved surprise. Did they advance a strategic goal?
I think you'd have to talk to the Israelis about what they're doing or what they're not doing. I really can't speak to these sets of incidents one way or another. What I can say is, again, we're watching with concern the escalating tensions in the region and across that border here in the last week or so, and we don't believe, continue to not believe, that kinetic action, military action, by either side is really in either side's best interest, certainly not in the interest of what the Prime Minister says he wants to do, which is get families back to their homes. There's a better way forward here, and we're going to keep trying to proffer that.
Well, let's take a step back from that, though. What about the broader vulnerability? If supply chains are vulnerable, aren't we all vulnerable?
I mean, look, again, I can't speak about these incidents or the details of them or may have happened or not, George. I hope you can appreciate that. I can just tell you that what we're focused on right now in our foreign policy is making sure that this conflict doesn't broaden and doesn't deepen, and that's why we still have sufficient and very capable military force in the region. That's why we continue to try to find a diplomatic solution, and it's why we're working with allies and partners all across the region to try to see if we can prevent this conflict from escalating.
I understand. I was asking a different question. Are we taking steps to protect our own supply chains, given the vulnerabilities revealed by this?
Again, without speaking to the details of it, I just tell you the president has made it clear that he wants the American supply chain to be as resilient and as vibrant as possible. He wants the supply chain for American goods and technology to start here in the United States, and that's why he's been working so hard in a bipartisan way to make that happen.
It appears that the Gaza ceasefire talks have gone cold. Is that right?
I would say that we are not achieving any progress here in the last week to 2 weeks. We have, not for lack of trying, but it doesn't appear like Mr. Sinwar is prepared at all to keep negotiating in good faith, especially after he murdered 6 hostages in a tunnel. So, I mean, just in execution style. So it doesn't appear as if he's willing to move move this forward. But it doesn't mean that we're not trying. You heard the president talk about this just a few days ago. Things can be unrealistic until all of a sudden they are realistic, and that's why our team is still engaged with Qatar, with Egypt, with the Israelis to see if we can't move it forward.
Finally, we've all saw the results of this Iranian hack interference in our election this week. What more can you say about what the United States is doing right now to combat the interference that we're seeing from Iran, from China, from Russia?
Yeah, we've got a very robust interagency effort all across the government to deter and to defeat foreign malign actors that are trying to interfere in our election. You talked about Iran. We know Russia's at this as well. Certainly China has shown some interest in involving themselves in our elections. And so one of the things we're doing is we're calling it out. The Director of National Intelligence has now issued a couple of reports identifying the countries that are involved here and what we think they're doing. You've seen some indictments by the Justice Department. You've seen additional sanctions laid on by Treasury and by the State Department. We are very much focused on this, and we're going to continue to not only identify it when we're seeing it, but take sufficient tangible action to hold these actors accountable.
Are they trying to elect a specific candidate or simply sow chaos?
I think we know that where the Russians are in terms of some of their preferences. And in most cases, though, what we're seeing is an effort to sow discord and discontent and to try to shake the American people's confidence in our democratic institutions, in our electoral systems. And that's what we're doing that's what we're working really hard to combat. The American people ought to know that the federal government is working hand in glove with their local and state officials to ensure the safety and security of their ballots and their election day activities.
John Kirby, thanks as always for your time.
Yeah, you bet.